Hear now the reading, a compilation from the Bhagavad Gita. Neither the assemblage of the gods nor the adept kings know my origin, because I am the origin of all the gods and adepts. I established this whole universe, Arjuna, with a single portion of myself and remain separate. Learn that he by whom all things were formed is incorruptible, and that no one is able to effect the destruction of it, which is inexhaustible. It is without birth and meeteth not death. All this universe is pervaded by me in my invisible form. I enter the earth supporting all living things by my power. Behold, O son of Pritha, my forms by hundreds and by thousands of diverse kinds, divine, of many shapes and fashions, the whole universe, animate and inanimate, gathered here in one. Brahman, the supreme, is the exhaustless Adhyatma, is the name of my being manifesting as the individual self. Karma is the emanation which causes the existence and reproduction of creatures. Adibhuta is the supreme spirit dwelling in all elemental nature through the mysterious power of nature's illusion. Adidaivata is the Purusha, the spiritual person, and Adiyajna is myself in this body, O best of embodied men. Earth, water, fire, air, akasha, manas, buddhi, and ahankara is the eightfold division of my nature. It is inferior. Know that my superior nature is different and is the knower. By it, the universe is sustained. This perishable body, O son of Kunti, is known as Kshetra. The soul who knows it, Kshetrajna, the knower in every body. That knowledge which through the soul is a realization of both the known, the knower, is alone esteemed by me as wisdom, and the object of wisdom, from knowing which a man enjoys immortality. Thus, there are two kinds of being in the world, the one divisible, the other indivisible. The divisible is all things and the creatures. The indivisible is called Kutashta, or he who standeth on high, unaffected. But there is another spirit designated as the Supreme Spirit, Paramatma, which permeates and sustains the three worlds. I am in all hearts of men. They who depend on me and labor for deliverance from birth and death know Brahma, the whole Adhyatma, and all karma. Those who rest in me, knowing me to be the Adibhuta, the Adidaivata, and the Adiyajna, know me also at the time of death. Doing so, they realize there is that which upon the dissolution of all things else is not destroyed. It is indivisible, indestructible, and of another nature from the visible. We now give to you our very own Dr. Eugene Jennings.
Hey, thank you, Monica. We brought together that entire collation from the Gita because it presents just about the entire history of involution and evolution that we could possibly consider. If we pay attention to the flow of the reading from the beginning through the end, we will see that there is inclusive all aspects of what becomes involved or is contained in involution, as well as all of that which evolves and what the end of evolution is for a particular period of existence. And so, what we would ask the listeners at this point to do is just consider for yourself, what do you think and what do you know of involution and evolution? That's a little 10-second break just to reflect. What do we know? If we look at this topic from the perspective of science, obviously it would embrace all of science. There would not be any discipline, any subject, any aspect that would not be included that pertains to life. Yet that's not the science that we study every day in school. There are gaps. Similarly, there probably are gaps theosophically, but if we consider what involution and evolution are from a theosophic perspective, we also have to realize that that embraces all of life, all aspects that exist pre life and or manifestation, as well as embraces those subjective states that we call after death, states of consciousness, elevated states, transcendent states, samadhi states, etc. We don't know enough to really embrace then the full scope of what real involution and evolution would be. But we can point out certain aspects that the teachings do talk about that if we follow will surely bring us to a point of deep consideration of not only life as we think it is, but even life in regards to ourselves. And perhaps maybe then we can correct some misideas that we have, and we can see a little bit more clearly. So, when we think about involution and evolution, what are we talking about? What the devil is it? The reading that existed next to the diagram, that infamous diagram, page 200, of the seven globes and the transfer of the life energies and or involution down to globe D and evolution into globe G, etc. That reading that was next to it spoke about one of the most important elements of all of life and all of evolution from a perspective of the theosophic view, and that was the monad. And there are many ways that we can talk about the monad. But for tonight's purposes, we have to recognize that just as HPB presented the proem to us in the beginning of the secret doctrine that gave us an introduction into what this teaching is about, and also a synopsis of those seven stanzas that represent the first portion of that book on cosmogenesis, she also mentioned that it was simply an algebraic approximation. And so that gives us freedom and leeway to try to fill in some of the gaps and use different tools to better understand this. So when we think about involution, obviously those that have studied theosophy might feel like, yes, I got it. It's the involvement of spirit in matter. And to a certain degree, that's fine. It is. But can we get any clearer in terms of understanding what that means? Well, we can say, it's spirit turning into a dense appearance on the globe D as per the picture that was there with the invite to the lecture or talk tonight. And then going back up to the globe G, or involving and becoming aware, as it spoke about in the reading, the awoken degrees of the monad. But what does that really tell us? What knowledge does that give us? How does that help us understand ourselves better? Each one can look at that, ponder that, meditate that, and come to an understanding that is equal to their being, and that may be satisfactory. But what does the process of involution, perhaps from a theosophical perspective, look like? And what is evolution about? And so when we look at involution, we can consider again the reading that introduced tonight's talk, because that reading gives us a view of all of the different processes that the monad must go through in terms of the fullness of a life's journey or a cosmic life's journey. And so, if the monad is what we would say the central player, the protagonist, the heart of the entire drama of involution and evolution, we have to realize that although there's one monad, there appear to be infinite numbers of monad. And why do we say that? Because if we are using the proem as a outline, then we have to acknowledge that there are different degrees of monadic awakening that are inherent in the different stages of cosmic manifestation on the one hand, and then cosmic awakening on the other hand. That means that there is, metaphorically speaking, and perhaps eventually one day scientifically speaking, a monad that is responsible for the entire manifestation of the universe, or the multiverse, if you wish to expand your thought process that much. And what would that mean? That would mean that at the heart of that monad, as per the stanzas, because the stanzas give us the involution and the evolution in the outline 1 through 7, and we'll jump on that point in a minute. But each monad has its own center, and that center can be looked at somewhat loosely as the logoic heart, the pure center, the divine nucleus of that monad that holds all of the information that will be used in the formation of that multiverse, metaverse, universe, or if we are progressively coming into matter, how that first cosmic substratum gives rise to what we would loosely call, from the scientific side, the Big Bang, that involves the inflationary period, that subsequently involves the formation of particles, that subsequently involves the aggregation of those particles, that subsequently is tied up into the formation of nebulae that are the ground substance for the development of galaxy clusters, as well as galaxies, and then the solar systems, as well as the globes in those, or the planetary bodies, down to the kingdoms of the globes, if it is a man bearing globe, down to the forms that arise from the elements that have consolidated out of the formation of the globe itself. And so, if we get the drift, there is that universal monad, but then there's got to be a center for the formation of the galaxy clusters, similar to perhaps the black holes at the heart of every galaxy. Then there's got to be those that are, how can we say, in charge of the galaxies, and those that are then in charge of the solar systems within that galaxy, and then those that are in charge of the globe bodies that are formed, which is where that initial diagram on the invitation comes in: globe A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc., down to the monads that are involved in the formation of the elements, and the monads that are involved in the formation of the kingdoms, and the monads that are involved in the formation of the human form, and then those that are involved in the formation of the awakening or the lighting up of manas. And so, what theosophy does for us is that it gives us a full span of involution. But involution, before it gets to the next step, is its own evolution. It's almost like a little swirl going down, and then a bigger swirl that includes the little swirl, then going down, and a bigger swirl that includes that. And what does that mean? That means that, for, if we use the terminology of modern physics, every particle, every quark, every atom, every proton, every electron, every atom, every cell, there is going to be some aspect of a monadic component that is going through an evolutionary process. We typically don't think like that. We don't typically think on those lines, but HPB makes an analogy to the idea of the sophistication and the journey of a monad through those intergalactic stages and states, even before it generates the formation of a globe, which is different from those that are involved in the kingdoms of the globe. And so, again, when we're looking at it from that theosophical perspective, we're talking about that primary substratum of the universe that forms, or the unmanifest monad of Pythagoras. And out of that state arises those three logoic stages, but HPB tells us in Isis Unveiled, those logoic stages are threefold. Hence, we've got 9 plus the 1, that means 10 pre-cosmic stages of intelligence, because she talks about those stages as being affiliated with the omniscience that is inherent in and thrills through every point space of the universe. And when we look at those together, she labels that the theogony of cosmos, i.e., those divine conscious powers and forces that are involved in the creative manifestation. We did not say creation, we said creative as an adjective to describe the process, manifestation. And so, from the unknown causal ground to that divine ground of consciousness to the subsequent ground of creative manifestation, we are looking at stages of involution that have to do with monadic elements that have reached stages of consciousness that we can't even conceive of yet as it relates just to the involutionary aspect. And then when we are looking at the energy side, so to speak, of what might be called the creative elements, or sometimes she refers to them depending upon the context you are in as the Dhyani Chohanic intelligences, seven which arise from the one, or that Ishvaric state, or that composite state, or that state of Brahma with the little inverted V over the A to indicate that it is different from the absoluteness. And this is reflected again if we go through the stanzas. We'll see that the first has to do with the monads in that state of pralaya. The second, their preparations to emerge from that state. The third stanza, she says, pertains to the awakening of the universe and the emergence of the monads. The fourth stage she refers to as the awakening of the germ within those monads for the differentiation of those divine intelligences that are geared towards the creative manifestation of that universe. Then she speaks about in the next stanza the formation of what she relates to as that nebula that is responsible for whether a galaxy, whether a solar system, whether a globe, or in some respects, a being. And she tells us in the footnotes that the stages for that manifestation run from the homogeneous stage to the gaseous stage to the curd like stage. And these are all stages of the nebula that we can correspond scientifically with. Then from that curd like stage to the atomic, which becomes the fiery, subsequently the watery, and then the globe itself has formed. And that pertains, as she tells us, through what are called the elemental stages of global development that are affiliated with the kingdoms and the awakening of mind to come, but this is still involution. So again, we can talk about different types of involution. We can talk about different stages of involution. We can talk about and recognize the monadic development that gives rise to those stages. And then we can recognize that each of these are, in some respects, holons, that the solar system is embedded in the galaxy. The solar system is its own unit, functioning. The galaxy is its own bigger unit functioning, but the galaxy is in the cluster of galaxies, which is its own unit functioning, each of which includes the other, but each of which is a whole in and of themselves in regards to a circle of experience. In other words, each of those have their circles of manvantaras or periods of activity, pralaya, rest, and development. And so when we look at the stanzas, we see 1 through 7, as she explains, reveals that involution. Now, we can see that process from the Bhagavad Gita reading that we had, just from the point of view of Brahma the exhaustless, Adhyatma, the karma that emerges, that is the cause for the existence of all those beings. Adibhuta, which is that elemental substance, those points, those particles, those aspects of the monad that are putting together those forms. Subsequently to the Purusha, or the Dhyani Chohanic consciousness, and the Ariadna, that consciousness spark that inheres in the body. This is all involution. We can talk about involution again, and this was mentioned, I think, sometime last year in Subarau's article on the 12 signs of the zodiac. It's kind of one of this student's semi favorites. And if we look at his interpretation of the 12 signs in terms of the 12 stages, we see all of the elements that was expressed in the stanzas, the elements that are in the Bhagavad Gita, the elements that are in this particular article, and the different stages and specificities that are required. So he runs from number 1, the self-existent, the eternal Brahman, to 2, the pranava, the om, the breath, the spirit, the emotion, to 3, the androgynous, that condition that holds both the polar opposites within it prior to separating into positive and negative, or centrifugal and centripetal, or light and darkness. Number 4, the sacred tetragram, the 4 matras of pranava, those 4 stages, those 4 breaths, the 4 avastas, so the 4 states: waking, sleeping, deep sleep, and turya. Then moving into 5, after the states have been established, the consciousness that is aware of those states in terms of, he says, the 5 Brahmas. HPB tells us those 5 are the 7 Dhyani Chohans in a different system. Again, Tibetan system, Hindu system, the Gnostic systems, etc. The Gnostic system is another one which shows this very well. Number 6 is the astral light of the Holy Virgin, or that substance that is primeval that will then go to 7, the 36 top bonds, or the elements of differentiation that will then be the basis for the aggregates that put together all of the forms. And that is summarized as the 8th stage, as the universe in thought before its manifestation. So we are still moving through segments of involution. Number 9, the 9 Prajapatis, or the assistants of the demiurgos. Number 10, the shape of the material universe. And we heard that talk last week about the dodecahedron, that 12-sided figure that has multiple shapes within it, and we'll show something like that in a moment, which then gives rise to the 14 lokas, then the 5 elements. That's a little twist in his respect, but those final 5 elements then become the low point from which the globes, the kingdoms, the continents, etc., begin to develop. All of this is still involution from a theosophical perspective. So we can see just from the involutionary side, that diagram again with the link to the talk from A, B, C, and D contains a lot more than we initially thought about it, as just being the involution of the life wave and the formation of the human form and the awakening of the mind. We didn't even get to the awakening of mind yet at this point. And so we can see that depending upon how we want to utilize the teachings of theosophy, each of these stages of simple involution can be expanded, they can be contracted, they can be applied to the universe, they can be applied to a globe, they can be applied to the elements, etc. This comes from Judge's article. Some of you may be familiar with it: Universal Application of Doctrine. All of the laws of theosophical understanding are applied Two, all of the states, all of the stages, all of the substances, all of the planes, all of the degrees. Now, once we reach that low point and we are at a point where we have formed all of the elements and all of the matter, as per Subarao, the five elements, but we remember the reading from the Bhagavad Gita: earth, water, fire, air, akasha, manas, buddhi, ahankara. My eightfold division is inferior. All of this pertains to that eightfold division, but we still haven't even gotten to the manas, the buddhi, or the ahankara, still, all of which are inferior. And so when we start talking about evolution, most of us are familiar with that diagram that was present there from the perspective of the so-called life wave. And that life wave is described again in terms of the monads that have come over from a previous globe of experienced, metaphorically and or actually, depending upon how you're reading the teachings, from the lunar globe or from the moon chain. Each of those globes are sevenfold, and if they are human bearing, they are sevenfold in terms of not only form, but mind. And so it is here that most students that have studied the doctrines of involution and evolution from the theosophical perspective as it relates to the lunar chain and the earth chain and the life wave going from the lunar as it dies, similar to a body dying, and the life energies then going through a state of pralaya or after death states or kamaloka and or devashan, and then coming back into birth on that involution, because again, even life and death are in involution and evolution. We have to involve ourselves into the forms that we will then use karmically to acquire a greater degree of awareness, enlightenment, consciousness, knowledge. So, in truth, the title of the talk should have been Involution, Evolution, Learning, Assimilation, and Mastery. That is the key job of the monadic element that uses all of these forms. But the conundrum is every particle is its own monad. And yet, it's not every particle as a monad that's going from the particle to a being, to a globe, or anything like that. So we need to exercise a little metaphysical thinking in terms of thinking differently beyond a linear cause and effect model. Because theosophy has to stretch our minds and show us things in different ways in order to understand something that may be seven-dimensional from a two or three-dimensional perspective. That's a stretch. But still, when we are going, if we're using that particular diagram from the lunar chain as it's dying to the formation of the earth chain, we usually talk about the sevenfold stream. But remember that the formation of the globe itself within this particular system is also part of that life stream that is coming over from the previous globe chain. And so, really, the elements that are involved in any involution, development, and subsequent evolution for the purpose of learning, assimilation, and mastery begin with the elementals, as we typically talk about them from a theosophic perspective. And we know that they will not achieve any significant degree of awakening in comparison to mind awakening this particular round or even this particular Manvantara, depending upon how we segment and look at the years that are involved. But nonetheless, they are still part of the process. And so, for ease sake, the process begins with after the formation of the globe has taken place, the life wave begins in the globe's most ethereal state, as well as the life waves, to develop and yet assimilate the knowledge that is possible from every kingdom. And so the teachings tell us that stream of life is actually made up of 7 classes of monads. Again, we're dealing with the monads. The monad we can look at for practical and ease of purposes as either an atmabuddhic particle, quanta, field, substratum, whichever term we want to use, that has not yet awoken to monastic awareness, i.e., pre human. We can look at the monad from the Atmabuddhi Manas, human, and we can look at that monad from the transhuman Atmabuddhi Manas or Buddhi Manas, awakening, depending. But again, before the monads from a prior globe coming over to this one can achieve that human state, they have to assimilate all of the knowledge or experiential encounters that are available in the mineral states, in the plant and or vegetable states. And again, these are not separate, but it's the surplus as it's described once the mineral stages in all of their forms through the various degrees of mineral formation. That's an evolution and involution in and of itself. The different kinds of minerals, the different kinds of metals. The monad goes through those to assimilate, awaken to resonate with the information and knowledge that is inherent in those states from a point of view of experience. Once it goes through that mineral stage, as the teachers say, the surplus moves to globe B and it enters into the plant stage, and then that second tail comes in to globe A to experience that mineral stage. So it's almost as though we've got a snake and it's got 7 segments. And each segment can go through one kingdom and then move to the next. And then the second segment goes to the first kingdom, while the first segment went to the second. And when the first segment goes to the third, the second is moving to that second, the third is coming into the first. And so there's a progressive movement going on, a progressive experience from the mineral state to the vegetable state to the animal state. And just for ease of thinking, we can believe that according to that diagram, again, that was there in the beginning, that fourth plane is called the archetypal. That third is called the creative or the intelligible. The second is the formative. That first is the physical, where globe D is. But just for ease of thinking, we can think of that archetypal plane as holding the full archetypal developmental scheme for the minerals, the full archetypal developmental scheme for the vegetables and the plants, the full scheme, in other words, for each kingdom up to and inclusive of the human kingdom, its forms, and all of the experiences that are allowable through that particular form once the assimilation is going on. At the human stage, karma becomes more self-reflectively, morally, and ethically involved and active. But we must not assume that there is not karma for the animal or any of the other stages. There's an interesting comment that the teachers make that they state in passing, all of the kingdoms are subject to karma, from the bodhisattvas, the dhyani chohans, to the human kingdom, to the animal kingdom, and even the globe. So again, they're stretching our way of thinking. We can talk about linear evolution from the Darwinian perspective. And even though we would think of that perhaps from the human side as involution, think about the monads going through those stages as awakening to their own degree of evolution. So again, just like we have cells within our bodies, but the cells are within molecules, each has an individual life, but each is subject to the life of the greater. The molecules are in the organs are in the body is being ruled by the autonomic system as well as the consciousness of our brains. All systems within systems, monads in various degrees of their own evolutionary awakening and experience. And so we have to recognize that this process, although we're just saying involution and evolution, seems to give us a nice, comfortable snapshot, that we can step outside of our comfort zones and begin to examine what it really means for a universe to be conscious, what it really means for a godlike consciousness to be present within a universe, or to be present in such a way that it has an influence over our globe. It is not the God, but it is almost godlike in comparison to our way of thinking, our way of perception. And if you recognize the role of the archetypal structures, each of those archetypal structures provides the framework that gives us the limit for the experience for that particular kingdom during this particular evolutionary cycle. Now, I don't know if I can do a quick, let me try to do this, screen share again. And let me see if I can zip you guys out for a moment. Oops, did I zip everything out?
No, everything looks the same.
There's nothing there?
There is no screen share yet.
No screen share. Okay, and okay, so I probably can't do it. But there are some of you that may be aware of HPB's pictures from the Pistis Sophia. And in that, she has a 2-page, let's see, it's a 2 pages with circular diagrams and 2 circles meeting each other. And let me try this again because I'm not doing good at the visual description. Let me try to put this one up. Can you see this one?
Yeah, there it is. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so this is a different one. But when we're looking at this, if we look at figure 1, she is not using it for evolutionary purposes per se, although she is in terms of in light of Pistis Sophia and Gnosis as it relates to that. But she points out that, in a sense, if you think of this as a monad, this point is the beginning of an evolutionary whirl. And every time that point moves, it goes from one to the second round. It has mixed and merged and assimilated and to some degree mastered what was in this kingdom below it. So if we get to the human kingdom with the human form, we now get to the point where this would represent manas, this circle. And for those of you that are familiar with the Taraka yoga system and the comparison that she gives us, if we think of 3 circles, that Atma Buddhic or that spiritual circle from the highest divine side, the monastic circle, and then this is our physical four planes from the archetypal to the creative to the formative to the physical, you will see that with the awakening of manas, mind in form begins to assimilate, or spirit kissing matter, however you want to describe it. And with each round, with each motion, with each movement, with each transition from a kingdom, we are embracing within ourselves increasing amount of awakening, increasing amount of awakening, increasing amount of awakening and experience. And if you look at this, is this the first round? Is this the second round? Is this the third round? Is this the fourth round? There are so many ways that we can use these diagrams to help us understand what the philosophy is. We move down to the sixth, we're seeing that double star in formation. What is it that we are awakening to? If we move to the seventh, we have assimilated fully that lower circle, i.e., we have assimilated the mineral kingdom, and then when we go around again, we have assimilated the vegetable kingdom and its knowledge and its experience. Going around again, we've assimilated that in the animal kingdom, and eventually it is all contained within the logoic heart of that monad. And that monad can function in each of these ways on each of these planes. And eventually it gets to a point where now it has completely assimilated what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The totality of each kingdom, the totality of each kingdom experience, the awareness of this. And this may simply be an animal assimilating all of its kingdoms and possibilities and species and experience for the monad, or the vegetable and its experiences, the plant kingdom, or all of the different archetypal experiences within the mineral kingdom, or moving further up into the transhuman stages, because beyond the human stages, we have the Deva stages, we have the Bodhisattvic stages as HPB defined them, and then we move into the Dhyani Chohan stages of experience, all based on their archetypal structures that provide different organizational bases upon which the same atoms work, but dealing with different energies and different forces. And so if we took this circle and just made it into points and squares, we can see, similar to the dodecahedron, there are many experiences that we can have, that we can assimilate. We can go up, we can go down, or we can master the totality. And then if we look at this further and we recognize that each point is a swirl and a bigger swirl and a bigger swirl, she tells us that this is actually the motion for one experience or even the globe, moving, 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 so that the north becomes the east. And this diagonal that represents the point that was here, which is now here, these are the lines, vertical, turning to horizontal. We are all familiar with the squaring of the circle, which is kind of what this is about. This superimposed in here is the square within the circle. You can see the square outlined here, but each has its own up and down, its own circle, its own descent, its own ascent, its own totality. Monads within greater monads, within greater monads, within greater monads. Again, everything replicated very nicely there. And then if we move to another diagram she shares with us, she says this was the chart of the pleroma. And if we think about this similar to that previous diagram, but also as the true archetypal structure for the universe, not for the lower planes. All of this, she says, becomes reflected within the incarnating monad. But the details are not there. Why? Because it needs to go through the evolutionary process to awaken those details, to be mindful of them, and to know what that experience is. Why? For the end goal from our human side for this particular round to become what they define as planetary spirits. What is a planetary spirit? The planetary spirit is the monastic development that has occurred at the end of a particular planetary round that has achieved the goal of full monastic awakening for that round. The lunar pitris, which we did not get to speak about, have not reached that goal, and those are the ones that begin the advance of the life wave from globe G to A, from the lunar to the human. Once they have reached the human stage and form of organization and those monads are ready to be lit up, those planetary spirits that have met the goal, that have achieved the goal of the previous cycle in terms of the lunar chain, or if we look forward, those that have achieved that for the earth chain, by the seventh round, they will become, as HPB shares with us, those beings that will be lighting up the manas of the laggards that could not reach the human stage, nor could reach the human perfection for this period of Manvantaric evolution. And so, I mean, there's so much more to say, but we will not. So we're going to end on this quote. HPB sums it up very, very clearly. And it's been read several times in the Aquarium series, but it bears repeating. Page 183 from The Secret Doctrine. Every form on earth and every speck or atom in space strives in its efforts towards self-formation to follow the model placed for it in the heavenly man. Its, or the atom's, involution and evolution, its external and internal growth and development have all one and the same object, man, and we should think monastic awakening, not the human form. Man as the highest physical and ultimate form on this earth, the monad in its absolute totality and awakened condition as the culmination of the divine incarnations on earth. That is a partial development for the monad as it relates to this particular globe in its involutionary and evolutionary cycle. And again, she says, that's just for this globe. We haven't even spoken about the solar system as its own hold. So on that note, we will stop share and end our talk. Thank you much.
Hello there, Dr. Jennings. This is Ken Kempos here at the Asabi Lodge. Thank you for that amazing description of involution and then evolution. I'm glad that you defined those clearly at the beginning, that the involution is, in a sense, the like in theosophical astrology, the descent from the form of spirit down to be more and more materialized into matter on globe D from A to D, and then the evolution, taking the acquired experience and evolving back from the material form to be more and more rarefied to globe G. That's amazing. Well, thank you for that.
Yep, you're welcome.
And I see a few hands raised already. Why don't we go to Laura, just on the right-hand side of my left-hand side of my screen. Laura, what question or comment do you
Thank you,
have
Jean.
for Dr. Jennings?
Thank you, Jean, for the talk. I always need a little bit of help getting into Pistis Sophia for sure. But one of the things that in preparing a talk for the new year on Krishna's flute and going to all the references and the secret doctrine on Krishna, one becomes very much aware of that same geometry taking place. You know, everywhere, whenever you open up anything about Krishna and the secret doctrine, it is always talking about the seven. It's always talking about the seven forms and the involution and the evolution come forward in that. So I wondered if you could speak something about that idea of Krishna in the monad.
Okay, so essentially, what might be the relationship between Krishna and the monad? And to a great degree, we can just kind of make it simple and say Krishna represents that monad, but would represent that monad as per that last circle with all of the circles inside in its full awakened capacity, so that it understands the ground out of which all things arise from that cosmic perspective, the involutionary process that all things have to go through, the lives that are going through those processes, why each point or each life is as sacred as each other, no matter what the form is that it is currently using, because it's all one identity. And that sevenfold structure, that sevenfold nature, those seven principles, or the seven circles, the seven steps, whichever way we want to talk about that seven as the primal, if we understand that, its threefold nature, its fourfold nature, how the one gives rise to the two, similar to the 12 signs of the zodiac that Subarao shared in that article, then, like Krishna, like that monad that is fully awakened, it can take any perspective or any position in order to assist another being, another group of beings, or even another globe move forward to its own next step and or stage of evolutionary awakening that is
So,
in line with its
yeah.
karmic tendencies.
And so that unity is what makes it possible for help to be given from those higher planes. The very
Indeed.
fact that there's similarity and the only difference is degree.
Yes.
And those
That
diagrams show that.
yes. They as HPB is fond of saying, look at all of the structures, look at the point, look at the horizontal, but don't forget the underlying ground or page that all of the diagram is on. So the diagrams are in black, but the page is white. Or, like the Bhagavad Gita, the symbols are in different colors, but the background is black. And that background, as the reading said, is that pervasive, supreme principle that makes all of life equal and one. So yes, thank you for that recognition.
Yes, that's fascinating. And why don't we go next to Judy? I see she has her hand raised as well. Judy, what do you have for us?
Yes, Jean, thank you for a really profound discussion of involution and evolution. Since you were a student of Subaru, and I admit I do not understand algebra or geometry very well, in 5 years of theosophy, there's an equation which he says somehow represents the coming together of Purusha and Prakriti, which really are in some sense one hierarchical chain, but it's the equation of 2 to the third power equals 8 minus 1 equals 7, which of course is the number of Manvantara. As you explained, the uh, three globes
Yes.
weave down into our fully incarnated Rupa plate D. Now, what is the reason for the -1 in that equation? I have never understood it. I have puzzled over it and tried to understand it, and I'm just kind of lost.
Got
So
it. So let me read that passage. Thank you. Page 160, 5 Years of Theosophy.
yes,
He's talking about, again, the entire spectrum of that Brahmanic wisdom that begins with the macrocosm, the microcosm, the chakras that pertains to the Hatha Yoga, Koala Yoga, Sakya Agamas, Siva Agamas, etc. And he gets to the point here where he says, now, according to the adepts of ancient Aryabharta, 7 principles are evolved out of these 3 primary principles or entities. Algebra teaches us that the number of combinations of n things, and that's the formula, taken 1 at a time, 2 at a time, 3 at a time, and so forth, equals 2 to the nth power, the number of times, -1. And so for some reason, that algebraic expression 2 to the 3rd power, i.e. 3 fundamental primary principles, would be 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. Take away 1 will give us 7. And so that 7 then becomes the second primary, and it is the combination that is possible from putting together those 3 primary fundamental principles. Those 3 primary fundamental principles he calls Parabrahm, Sakti, and Prakriti. So when you put Parabrahm with Prakriti, you get one thing. When you put Sakti with Prakriti, you get another thing. When you put Parabrahm, Sakti, and Prakriti together, you get another thing. When you put Parabrahm together with only Sakti, you get another thing. So the combinations that can be developed from that triad are 7. And those 7, he relates in this particular article to the 7 principles of theosophy. And so the formula 2 to the nth power -1 gives you the number of combinations that are available based on that n function. So if there were 4 things, it would be 2 to the 4th power -1 would give you the number of combinations that could be possibly made by putting those things together in different proportions.
right.
So again, that was his relationship of the Brahmanic side of the teaching to the theosophical side, and how to get the 7 principles from the 3 primary principles of Parabrahm, Sakti, and Prakriti. And so if we did Atma Buddhi Manas, that would be 3 to the nth power -1. So 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, -1 is 26. So in that regards, we would have, did I do my math right? Yeah, 3 to the nth power. Then we would have that many different combinations that we could use in terms of putting Atma together with Buddhi, or Atma together with Manas, or Atma together with Atma Buddhi Manas, etc., to see the differentiation that comes out of that, the organizational structures, and then how they function and what properties they would be emphasizing. But that, again, that's another lecture in and of itself. So I digress.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gyro had his hand up there.
All right. Gyro, we'll go next to you next. Have to unmute. So, there you are. Hello.
Is what is the monad And could it be that, did I hear you saying that monads are everywhere, kind of? So there's monads in courts and things like that. And then could it be that a collection of monads will, out of it would emerge a meta monad or something like that, and then all us monads would collectively form the supreme being monad that that could be called God or whatever you want to call it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I mean, were you correct in hearing me say that everything is a monad? And yes, HPB talks about that in monads, God's monads and atoms, as well as forces, and speaks about that from the point of view of Leibniz and his concepts of monadology, etc. Blah 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 blah. But it's interesting if we shift to her expression of the role of the monad in SD 110 111. And she puts it in regards to that archetypal structure of the astral in relation to human awakening. But she says something interesting. She says, that which propels towards and forces evolution, i.e., compels the growth and development of, in this case, man, towards perfection, is A, the monad, or that which acts in it unconsciously through a force inherent in itself. And related to that force is the monadic essence. And then she says, and in regards to man, the lower astral body or personal self. So we can substitute that for a moment if we want to be a little bold and say, whatever the organizational structure archetypically that monad is going through, that is still the evolutionary force, power, and essence that is using that form, assimilating that form, learning from that form, learning through the external experience and the internal, just like the reading suggested, external and internal, in order to assimilate the totality of the knowledge related to that kingdom. So if we go back to your question about the quartz or the minerals and the atoms and the molecules and the viruses and the protozoa and the bacteria and the organs of the body or whatever, all of that, yes. The difficulty comes in reconciling the fact that she says it's not the individual monad that evolves, because monads don't evolve. But part of the answer is in the nature of the essence of the monad and the nature of the force, as she says, that which is acting in it unconsciously through that force within it. And so that monad in its cosmic nature, as well as in its most atomic nature, as Patanjali says, when we get on the right path in terms of our meditations, whether from the atomic to the infinite, we can make that span, because now we are in touch with the natures of those monads. And she tells us as much in God's monads and atoms, when they all come together to create a reflection of the universal image that the gods can look upon. And so, again, all of the words that we use to describe processes that are extremely deep and yet most practical, because they are the forces and the energies and the directions of evolution. I mean, we don't stop to think that the Dhyani Chohans have much a role in external Darwinian evolution as they do in internal spiritual evolution.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
From the
thank
point
you.
of view of the monad that has evolved to the degree that the globe and the humanities and kingdoms are within its purview. Again, back to that circle from Pistis Sophia. Monads within monads, atoms within atoms, worlds within worlds, wheels within wheels, states of consciousness within states of consciousness. And unless we really discipline ourselves and work on that practice of clear seeing, clear understanding, we do get very bewildered, like Arjuna, when Krishna reveals that divine universal form. But that is a promise
Yes.
that is inherent within the teachings.
All right, Dr. Jennings, thank you for that explanation. Let's squeeze in one last question. We're really out of time, but Jeff has his hand up. Jeff from Japan?
That Jeff. Yeah, that Jeff.
Oh,
Yeah. Hi. And thanks for your broad and very comprehensive, great presentation, Gene. I believe there's a passage, and I can't find it, in the commentaries on the cosmogenesis that speaks of three evolutions: the monadic, the intellectual, and the physical. So
yes,
you're saying there's a monadic evolution, but monads don't evolve?
yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe. I'm
And
just asking.
and again, part of the trick, if I would say so, is yes, there is that monadic, which is that atmabuddhic. And when we enter into that atmabuddhic from the circles in Pistis and from the commentary that she talks about in Pistis in regards to levels of opening and awareness, there will be evolutionary stages within that atmabuddhic circle, that monadic. The majority of humanity has not reached that level in terms of awakening. And so she makes the distinction, as she says here, the totally awakened condition of the monad, which is different than evolutionary development through form. And that's a similar dynamic and dilemma that was mentioned with Darwin in terms of man having been an ape and the monad having used an ape form with monastic consciousness to gain experience. And so the form is simply the vehicle, the monadic essence inside, especially after it has awoken to the monastic state, uses those forms to further illuminate the inherent divine wisdom within itself. And so
Yeah.
it's not that anything is being added, but we are becoming more aware of what it is that we really are as forces and powers of nature. And consciousness is inherent in those, and particularly in that atmabuddhic state, different kind of consciousness and intelligible energy.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a good, excellent clarification. Because unless there's monadic evolution, there isn't evolution. I mean, that's the.
Well,
I'm
can we
just saying.
rephrase that? Can we
Okay.
just rephrase it, which is where monadic assimilation and awakening come in versus monadic evolution? I mean, it's like DNA.
Yeah.
DNA holds all of the possibility of the forms. Those forms can be added to, taken away from, but that essence in that nucleolus, which is different than the nucleus, doesn't change. And there is an inherent degree of intelligible consciousness that is deep within us that most of us don't acknowledge. We don't even know it's there. And so it's that light, metaphorically, that expands its circle. It's like dark energy versus that 5% of light energy. When that 5% of light energy becomes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we've got less dark energy, less dark matter, because it's being illuminated. But it's all there in one place. And so the awakening is different than the evolutionary development of form.
Yeah. I
which is
guess what
in
I'm saying, unless
assimilation.
there's what words did you use, like an accumulation, or unless there's an enhancement of of consciousness on the Buddhic or the monadic level, there isn't. That's a basis for. I mean, I'm thinking of the passage at the beginning of the symbolism. Am I hard to hear?
No, yeah, I'm putting it together. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I'm thinking of that passage at the beginning of the symbolism section in Anthropogenesis, where HBB says that Sat gives birth to Asat, and Asat gives birth to Sat. And I think that's sort of a description of what you're describing as what happens with the monad.
Right. I mean,
Okay.
without that essence and force, the monad is not present. But without the
Yes.
monad, the essence and force cannot do its thing to create the forms that are necessary for the monad to shine.
Yeah.
So yes,
exactly. Yeah. Good.
there too, and that's that androgynous state that Subaral talks about. And yet there are several states before that. But yes.
Well, thank you all very much. We should close up for today. And Jean, it's been an amazing tour de force, as usual, that you presented for us about the various stages of evolution and the essences of the monad. Very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you much.
And next week, we'll have Chelas and Mediums next Saturday. Thank you.
Alrighty.
And goodbye, all.
Namaste.
Much appreciated. Namaste.
Arigato.
Arigato.
Thank you, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Gene. Good night.
Good night, all.